Windows 10 ISO on USB refuses to boot after using DD to write it. I am using a Windows standard ISO file, win10-1511-1-English_x64.ISO, and I have verified its MD5 matches the expected. The ISO is mountable in OS X as a UDF format. I then copy it straight to my USB drive, like sudo dd if equals win10-1511-1-English_x64.ISO if equals /dev/disk1bs equals 1 meter. Then plug it into my Dell Optiplex 780, a little old, I know. Enable booting from USB device in the BIOS, and choose it, and all I get is no boot device available. Strike F1 to retry boot ... No boot sector on USB device. What am I doing wrong? The created USB is readable in OS X, but in other Windows boxes, it just says you need to format the disk in Drivey before you can use it. So it doesn't boot, nor can Windows read it. Update: I ran the OS X Boot Camp Assistant, checked the box, create a Windows 7 or later version install disk, and gave it the same ISO file. Then it magically boot fine, appears to be formatted FAT32. Maybe it's some special Dell limitation, they can only boot on USB if it's FAT32. Why would it not boot from straight UDF?
I cannot seem to find an official source for it, but it appears that UDF, if copied verbatim, cannot be booted from USB, and many ISO files are UDF formatted. Appears that for CD-ROM drives, being able to boot from them is accomplished by their conforming to the El Torito standard. However, for normal disk to boot, the MBR has to be set in it, which is apparently different bits than the El Torito bits. And apparently you can set one or the other, or both. So basically, if it's an ISO that's just El Torito, you have to use a tool, or carefully do the formatting, partition marking, and file copying manually, that will give you a MBR formatted, bootable USB. Copying raw ISO bits is not enough. A few ISOs may not need any special tool. Note the mention of ISO Hybrid, whose documentation mentions that normal ISOs, UDF formatted, are only bootable from CD drives unless you add an extra master boot record, i.e. outside of UDF spec. Apparently many mainline Linux distro ISOs are made this special way, but I know from experience Windows install ISOs of at least Windows 10 are not. For the ones that do need it, apparently you should avoid raw disk copies from ISO to USB X, the dd command on Unix S, or you'll run into the problem I did. In my experience, typically you'll be converting from a UDF ISO to a FAT32 USB device. The former is El Torito, the latter MBR, for their boot system. How do I place a bootable ISO on a USB drive? List lots of utilities that do this for you. See also this URL for OS X related options. Related. This URL mentions that it needs to be FAT32, and have files copied from the ISO. Update. No amount of .NET bootin seemed to work for me, bootcamp neither on newer ISOs. I'm guessing I was installing to an older box which couldn't read newer boot schemes. Using Rufus on Windows MBR and NTFS, FAT32 might have worked as well, but got some complaints of install.win being too big, and it worked for a Windows 10 ISO.
Lose one in VISC1. You have to copy the ISO to the drive instead of partition for it to work. Example, sudo dd if equals my.iso of equals /dev/sdabs equals 8 meters.
From the comments, worst seems to be a script so similar to the gist, They all wrap the complexity and use WimSplit if going to FAT32 and files are too big. I think smile this URL, so another option that's Linux Y.
Usbflashdrive.